The piano's final note hung in the air like a farewell when Harriet Dawson realized she would have to part with it. Tears blurred her vision as she traced her fingers across the polished rosewood surface one last time, the instrument that had been her mother's, her grandmother's, and now, for just a few more hours, hers. Marysville, California, in 1875 had promised so much when she'd arrived 6 months ago, but the gold rush town had offered more heartbreak than fortune. "You have until noon tomorrow, Miss Dawson," Mr. Finch had said that morning, his bushy eyebrows drawn together in what might have been sympathy if not for the hardness in his eyes. "3 months back rent isn't charity I can afford to give." Harriet's fingers trembled as she played a final melody, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the piece her mother had taught her first. Outside her window, the dusty main street of Marysville bustled with afternoon activity, miners, merchants, and travelers passing through on their way to the promised riches of the Sierra foothills. None of them knew that inside the small rented room above the millinery shop, a woman's heart was breaking. At 23, Harriet had come west with dreams as vast as the California sky. After her parents' deaths from influenza back in Boston, the piano had been her only inheritance of value, both monetary and sentimental. She had imagined building a new life, perhaps teaching music to the children of successful miners and merchants. Instead, illness had claimed her first weeks in town, and opportunity had proven scarce thereafter. A knock at her door startled her from her reverie. "Miss Dawson." It was Mrs. Wilkins from the general store. "I found someone interested in purchasing your piano. They can come tomorrow morning before Mr. Finch returns." Harriet swallowed hard. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilkins. That's very kind of you." After the woman left, Harriet returned to the piano bench and played until her candle burned low, memorizing the feel of each key beneath her fingertips, knowing that tomorrow, this last connection to her family would be gone forever. She didn't notice the man who paused outside her window, hat in hand, listening to her music float into the night. Cole Alderman had not intended to stop in Marysville for more than a night. 8 years of driving cattle across the Western Territories had taught him that towns were merely places to resupply, perhaps enjoy a proper meal and bath, before heading back to the open range. At 31, he had seen enough of civilization to know he preferred the company of his horse and the stars above, but the music had stopped him in his tracks. Standing in the dusty street, Cole found himself transfixed by the haunting melody drifting from the second-story window. It reminded him of something long forgotten, his mother playing on Sunday afternoons in their Tennessee home, before the war had taken his father and consumption had claimed her. "Beautiful, ain't it?" said a voice beside him. Cole turned to find an elderly man leaning on a cane, gazing up at the same window. "It is," Cole agreed, settling his hat back on his head. "Who's playing?" "Miss Dawson. Came from back east some months ago. Shame about her situation." "What situation is that?" the old man sighed. "Piano's being sold tomorrow. Can't make rent. Finch is a fair man in business, but he won't carry someone who can't pay." Cole nodded, understanding the harsh realities of frontier economics. Still, something about the music and the story of its player lingered with him as he continued to the boarding house where he'd taken a room. That night, as he lay on a bed that felt too soft after weeks on the trail, the melody followed him into his dreams. Morning came with the usual sounds of a busy mining town, wagons creaking, merchants setting up, miners heading out to try their luck once more. Cole found himself walking past the millinery shop again, this time noticing the narrow staircase that led to the apartments above. A small sign in the window confirmed what the old man had told him. Piano for sale, inquire within. Inside the shop, a plump woman with kind eyes looked up from arranging ribbons. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, eyeing his trail-worn appearance with curiosity. "The piano," Cole said, surprising himself. "I'd like to inquire about it." Mrs. Wilkins's eyebrows rose. "You don't strike me as a musician, Mr. Alderman, Cole Alderman, and no, madam, I'm not, but I'd like to know what's being asked for it all the same." $150, she replied. "It's a fine instrument brought all the way from Boston. Miss Dawson needs the money to clear her debts and perhaps have enough left to start fresh." Cole whistled low. It was nearly all the money he had from the cattle drive. "When is it to be sold?" "This very morning. In fact," she glanced at the clock on the wall, "the buyer is due within the hour. A gentleman from Sacramento who buys and sells such things. Plans to have it on the riverboat by afternoon." Cole felt a strange urgency take hold of him. "May I see it first, Mrs.?" Wilkins led him up the narrow staircase and knocked gently on the door. "Miss Dawson, there's a gentleman here about the piano." The door opened, and Cole found himself looking into the saddest pair of blue eyes he'd ever seen. The woman before him was slender, with chestnut hair pulled back in a simple knot. Her dress was plain but neat, and despite the evident distress in her expression, she carried herself with dignity. "Mr. Alderman is interested in seeing the piano, dear," Mrs. Wilkins explained. "Of course," Harriet said softly, stepping aside to let them enter. The room was small but tidy, with few possessions save for a narrow bed, a small desk, and the piano that dominated one wall. It was indeed a beautiful instrument, its rosewood case gleaming even in the dim light of the room. "It's a Chickering," Harriet explained, her voice taking on a hint of pride despite her circumstances. "My grandmother purchased it in 1848. It's traveled across the country twice now." Cole ran his fingers lightly across the polished surface. "Twice. My father moved us to Boston when I was a child. After my parents passed, I decided to come west. I thought," she faltered, "I thought I might find opportunity here." Cole nodded, understanding all too well how the promise of the West often fell short of dreams. "Would you play something?" he asked. Surprise flickered across her face, but she sat down on the bench and began to play. It was the same piece he'd heard the night before, and up close, it was even more affecting. Her fingers moved with grace and surety across the keys, drawing forth notes that seemed to speak of both joy and sorrow. When she finished, the room fell silent. Cole became aware of Mrs. Wilkins dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Thank you," he said simply. Harriet nodded, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. As they descended the stairs, Mrs. Wilkins sighed heavily. "Such a shame. That piano means everything to her. But Mr. Rochester from Sacramento has already agreed to the price, and he'll be here shortly with his wagon." Cole thought of the money in his pocket, earned through long days and longer nights on the trail. He thought of his plans to purchase land in Colorado Territory, perhaps start a small ranch of his own. And then he thought of the music and the woman with the sad blue eyes. "Mrs. Wilkins," he said, coming to a decision that felt both impulsive and inevitable. "I'd like to make an offer before this Mr. Rochester arrives." Back in her room, Harriet carefully wrapped her few pieces of sheet music in cloth, trying not to think about the piano-shaped emptiness that would soon dominate her small room. The knock, when it came, was expected but still made her heart lurch painfully. "Miss Dawson," Mrs. Wilkins called. "May I come in?" "Yes, of course," Harriet replied, steeling herself to face the buyer from Sacramento. But when the door opened, it was only Mrs. Wilkins who entered, her face alight with an expression Harriet couldn't quite read. "Where is Mr. Rochester?" Harriet asked, glancing past her to the empty hallway. "He hasn't arrived yet, dear, but I've come with news." Mrs. Wilkins clasped her hands together. "Your piano has been sold, or rather, it hasn't been sold at all." Harriet blinked in confusion. "I don't understand." "That gentleman, Mr. Alderman, he's paid your back rent in full, 3 months plus 2 months forward." Mrs. Wilkins smiled broadly. "The piano stays right where it is." "But why would he do that? I don't even know him." Harriet sank onto the piano bench, her knees suddenly weak. "He didn't say. Just handed over the money to Mr. Finch directly and asked that the matter be settled immediately." "This makes no sense," Harriet murmured, staring at the piano in disbelief. "Where is he now? I must thank him, or repay him somehow." "He said he had business to attend to but would call again tomorrow." Mrs. Wilkins patted Harriet's hand. "Such a blessing, my dear. I told you God provides." After Mrs. Wilkins left, Harriet sat at her piano in shocked silence. Who was this stranger who would part with so much money for someone he'd just met? What could possibly be his motivation? The questions swirled in her mind as her fingers automatically found the keys, playing a hymn of gratitude her mother had taught her long ago. Cole spent the rest of the day handling the business that had brought him to Marysville in the first place, selling the last of his shares in a small mining claim that had never produced much gold, but had been a place to invest some of his earnings over the years. The transaction complete, he found himself with considerably less money than he'd started the day with, but strangely, he felt no regret. He took supper at a small restaurant near the riverfront, watching the bustling activity of the wharf as steamboats arrived and departed. The Sacramento River had made Marysville an important shipping point, connecting it to San Francisco and the wider world beyond. Tonight, however, the usual interest he took in such comings and goings was muted, his thoughts continually returning to the room above the millinery shop and its occupant. What had possessed him to do such a thing? Cole was not a man given to impulsive gestures or grand displays. 8 years of driving cattle had taught him caution and practicality above all else. Yet something about that music, about the quiet dignity with which Harriet Dawson faced her misfortune, had moved him to action before he'd fully thought it through. The next morning found him standing once again at the foot of the narrow staircase, hat in hand, uncertain of his welcome. He had told Mrs. Wilkins he would call again, though now that the moment had arrived, he wasn't entirely sure why. The debt had been paid. There was no further business between them. Still, he climbed the steps and knocked on the door. It opened almost immediately, as though she had been waiting nearby. Harriet Dawson stood before him, her hair arranged more carefully than the day before, wearing a dress of faded blue that brought out the color of her eyes. "Mr. Alderman," she said, her voice steady though her hands fidgeted with the folds of her skirt. "Please come in." The room seemed somehow brighter today, sunlight streaming through the small window to fall across the piano. A vase of wildflowers sat atop it, a small touch of beauty that spoke volumes about its owner. "I wanted to thank you," Harriet began, gesturing for him to take the room's only chair while she sat on the piano bench. "What you did. I don't know how I can ever repay such kindness." Cole set his hat on his knee, feeling oddly formal and yet strangely at ease. "No repayment necessary, Miss Dawson. I was in a position to help, so I did." "But why?" The question came directly, her gaze meeting his with an intensity that suggested the answer mattered deeply to her. "You're a stranger to me. We met only yesterday." Cole considered how to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. "I heard you playing the night before last," he finally said. "Standing in the street below, it reminded me of my mother. She played, though not nearly as well as you." "When I learned the piano was to be sold." He shrugged, uncomfortable with articulating the sentiment that had driven him. "It seemed wrong, somehow." Harriet studied him, as if searching for some hidden motive in his face. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, for her expression softened. "Would you like some tea, Mr. Alderman? It's not much of a repayment, but it's a start." The simple offer broke the tension, and Cole found himself smiling. "That would be nice, thank you." As she busied herself with the small stove in the corner, Cole took the opportunity to observe her more closely. There was a quiet strength about her that intrigued him, a woman alone in a frontier town, facing hardship with grace. He'd met many people in his years on the trail, but few had made such an immediate impression. "How long have you been in Marysville?" he asked as she handed him a cup of tea. "6 months now." Harriet returned to the piano bench, her own cup balanced carefully in her hands. "I arrived in January, full of hope and plans. Things haven't quite worked out as I expected." "They rarely do out west," Cole observed. "What were your plans?" "I thought I might teach music. In Boston, I had a few students, children of family friends. I imagined the daughters of successful miners might want lessons in refinement." A self-deprecating smile crossed her lips. "I quickly discovered that Marysville has different priorities." "You were ill when you first arrived," Mrs. Wilkins mentioned. Harriet nodded. "Mountain fever." "I was bedridden for nearly a month. By the time I recovered, what little money I had brought with me was nearly gone, and I found myself—" She hesitated, pride warring with honesty. "Well, you know the situation. And your family, no one back east who might help?" "No one," she replied simply. "My parents are gone, and I have no siblings or close relations. The piano and my mother's locket are all I have left of them." The matter-of-fact way she spoke of her isolation struck Cole deeply. He understood solitude had chosen it, but there was something about her circumstances that seemed particularly unfair. "What about you, Mr. Alderman? What brings you to Marysville?" she asked, deftly turning the conversation away from herself. "Business, mostly. I had a small investment in a mining claim outside town. Nothing that ever paid much, but it was time to sell my share." He didn't mention that the proceeds from that sale were considerably less than what he'd paid to Mr. Finch. "I drive cattle most of the year, bringing herds up from Texas to markets in Kansas and occasionally further west." "That sounds like a difficult life." "It can be," he acknowledged, "but there's freedom in it too. The open sky, new horizons." He found himself wanting to explain the beauty he found in the life she likely saw only as hardship. "There's nothing quite like watching the sun rise over the prairie, or finding a mountain pass that opens into a valley no one's told you about." Harriet's expression grew wistful. "I've always lived in cities. Even our journey west was by steamship to Panama, then up to San Francisco, and by riverboat to Marysville. I've seen little of the country between." "Perhaps someday you will," Cole said. Their conversation flowed easily after that, moving from their respective pasts to books they had read, to observations about Marysville and its inhabitants. Cole found himself surprised at how quickly the morning passed, and more surprised still at how reluctant he was to leave when the church bell rang noon. "I should go," he said, rising from his chair. "I've taken up too much of your day already." "Not at all," Harriet assured him, standing as well. "I've enjoyed our conversation immensely, and I still haven't properly thanked you, please," Cole interrupted gently. "No more thanks are necessary, though." He hesitated, then continued with uncharacteristic boldness. "I would like to hear you play again if you wouldn't mind." Her face brightened immediately. "I would be happy to." Cole resumed his seat as Harriet settled herself at the piano. This time she played something different, a lively, joyful piece that filled the small room with warmth. "Mozart," she explained when she finished. "One of my favorites." "It's beautiful," Cole said simply. At the door he paused, hat in hand once more. Miss Dawson, I wonder if you might permit me to call again tomorrow. Perhaps we might take a walk if the weather is fine." The smile that lit her face was answer enough, but she replied with formal propriety. "I would like that very much, Mr. Alderman." As Cole descended the stairs, he found himself whistling the Mozart piece, his step lighter than it had been in years. The next morning dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for the promised walk. Harriet spent more time than usual on her appearance, choosing her best day dress, a green cotton with only minor mending at the cuff, and arranging her hair with special care. She told herself it was simply proper respect for the man who had shown her such kindness, but the flutter in her stomach when she heard his footsteps on the stairs suggested otherwise. "Good morning, Miss Dawson," Cole greeted her, his smile warming his weather-worn features. He looked different today, freshly shaved, his usual trail clothes replaced by a clean shirt and vest. Ready for our walk. Marysville in spring was at its best, the harsh summer heat not yet upon them. They strolled along the river, where cottonwoods provided dappled shade and wildflowers bloomed in profusion. "I never take the time to explore the town properly," Harriet admitted, as they paused to watch a riverboat dock. "Between looking for work and worrying about rent, I'm afraid I've missed much of its beauty." "Most places have beauty if you look for it," Cole replied, "though I confess, towns aren't usually where I find it. Where do you find it then?" Harriet asked, genuinely curious about this man who seemed so at ease in the wilderness she found intimidating. Cole considered the question seriously. "In unexpected places, mostly. A canyon at dawn when the light first touches the rock, a herd of antelope moving across the plains. Even a thunderstorm, if you're safely sheltered." He described these scenes with such vivid simplicity that Harriet could almost see them. It occurred to her that while she might play music, Cole Alderman had his own kind of poetry in him. Their walk took them through the town square and past various shops, Cole occasionally tipping his hat to acquaintances. Harriet noticed how people regarded him with respect, but also a certain distance, as though recognizing in him the transient nature of his profession. "How long will you stay in Marysville?" she asked, the question that had been hovering in her mind finally finding voice. Cole glanced at her, something unreadable passing through his eyes. "I'm not certain. My business is concluded, but—" He left the sentence unfinished. They stopped at a small cafe for lunch, where Cole insisted on treating her despite her protests. Over simple fare of soup and bread, their conversation ranged widely, from books they had read to dreams they had harbored. "I always thought I might have my own ranch someday," Cole admitted, surprising himself with the confession. It wasn't something he often shared. "A place of my own, not too large, but good grazing land with a creek running through it." "Why haven't you?" Harriet asked. He shrugged. "Never seemed to be the right time. Or the right place, perhaps. What about you? Was teaching music always your dream?" "Playing was," she said softly. "Teaching came from necessity after my parents died, but I love it helping others find the joy in music that I've always known." As they walked back toward her room, Cole made a decision. "Miss Dawson, there's a social at the church tomorrow evening. I understand there's to be dancing. Would you consider attending with me?" Harriet hesitated, though not from reluctance. "I would be delighted, but—" She gestured vaguely at her worn dress. "I'm afraid I'm not properly outfitted for such an occasion." Cole's eyes crinkled with understanding. "If you don't mind my saying so, you would bring grace to any gathering, regardless of your attire." The sincerity in his voice brought warmth to Harriet's cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Alderman. In that case, I accept your invitation." At her door, they parted with the promise to meet the following evening. Harriet watched him walk away. his tall figure moving with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to covering long distances on foot. She realized, with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, that she was looking forward to tomorrow more eagerly than she had anticipated anything in a very long time. Inside her room, she went directly to the piano, her fingers finding the keys as naturally as breathing. She played a piece she hadn't touched in months, a romantic ballad her mother had loved, and found herself thinking of a pair of kind eyes and a smile that transformed a weathered face. Cole, meanwhile, found himself facing a dilemma he hadn't anticipated when he'd impulsively paid Harriet's rent. His plans had always been to continue north after concluding his business in Marysville, perhaps exploring opportunities in Oregon Territory. Yet now, the thought of leaving filled him with a strange reluctance. He spent the afternoon in the company of James Porter, a cattle broker he'd done business with in the past, discussing potential opportunities. Truthfully, there's good land to be had not 30 miles from here, Porter told him as they shared a drink at the saloon. The foothills have plenty of water and decent grazing. Not the grand spread you might find in Texas, but a man could do worse. I'll think on it, Cole replied, his mind already considering possibilities he hadn't entertained before. The church social was a lively affair, with most of Marysville's respectable citizens in attendance. Lanterns hung from trees in the churchyard, and tables laden with food lined one side. A small group of musicians, a fiddler, a guitarist, and a man with a harmonica, provided music for dancing. Cole waited nervously at the foot of Harriet's stairs, aware of the curious glances from passers-by. When she appeared, his breath caught in his throat. She wore the same blue dress as before, but had somehow transformed it with a white lace collar and a ribbon in her hair, which fell in loose waves around her shoulders. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Her smile was shy but pleased. "Thank you. Shall we go?" The evening was a revelation for both of them. Cole, who rarely participated in such social gatherings, found himself enjoying the simple pleasure of community. Harriet, who had kept largely to herself since arriving in Marysville, was introduced to neighbors she hadn't properly met. When the dancing began, Cole hesitated. "I should warn you, I'm not much practiced at this." Harriet took his hand with newfound confidence. "Then I shall teach you, as you would teach me about finding beauty in unexpected places." They joined the other couples for a Virginia reel, Cole following Harriet's lead with more enthusiasm than skill. His occasional missteps were met with her laughter, not mockery but genuine delight that soon had him laughing too. Later, as they took a break from dancing to enjoy refreshments, Mrs. Wilkins approached them, beaming with approval. "Miss Dawson, we've just learned that our pianist for the Sunday service has taken ill. I don't suppose you might consider filling in. The congregation would be most grateful." Harriet glanced at Cole, who nodded encouragement. "I would be honored, Mrs. Wilkins." "Wonderful. And perhaps if it goes well we might discuss a more permanent arrangement. Several mothers have expressed interest in lessons for their daughters." Mrs. Wilkins patted Harriet's hand. "You see, things have a way of working out." As the older woman moved away, Harriet turned to Cole with shining eyes. "Did you hear that? A chance to play regularly and possibly students as well." "I'm glad for you," Cole said, genuinely pleased by her happiness. "You deserve the opportunity to share your gift." The band struck up a slower tune and couples moved into a waltz. Cole offered his hand. "Shall we try again? I believe this one might be more my pace." As they joined the dancers, Cole placed his hand at Harriet's waist, the proper distance between them as they began to move in time to the music. Despite his claim of inexperience, he guided her with surprising grace. "You're a quick learner, Mr. Alderman," Harriet observed, her voice soft enough that only he could hear. "I have an excellent teacher," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of possibilities neither had allowed themselves to consider before. As the music continued, they moved together as if they'd been dancing for years, the rest of the gathering fading into a blur around them. The walk back to Harriet's room was quiet, both of them wrapped in thoughts they weren't yet ready to voice. At her door, Cole took her hand. "Thank you for a most enjoyable evening, Miss Dawson." "Harriet," she said suddenly. "Please call me Harriet." A slow smile spread across his face. "Harriet, and I'm Cole." "Cole," she repeated, as though testing the feel of it on her tongue. "Thank you for everything, not just tonight, but for what you did with the piano. I still can't quite believe your kindness." "It wasn't entirely selfless," he admitted. "I wanted to hear you play again." The honesty in his voice touched her deeply. On impulse, she rose on tiptoe and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. "Good night, Cole." He stepped back, his expression a mixture of surprise and pleasure. "Good night, Harriet. I'll see you tomorrow." "I would like that," she replied, a new confidence in her voice. Inside her room, Harriet moved to the piano, her fingers finding the keys even in the darkness. She played softly, a melody that spoke of new beginnings and unexpected joy. Over the next weeks, a pattern emerged. Cole would call on Harriet in the mornings, and they would explore Marysville together, discovering hidden corners of the town and building a map of shared memories. In the afternoons, Harriet would practice for Sunday services or give lessons to the growing number of students' misses. Wilkins had helped her find. Evenings often found them together again, sometimes for a simple meal in her rooms, sometimes for a walk along the river as the day cooled. May turned to June, and Harriet found her circumstances transformed. With regular income from playing at church and teaching, she no longer worried about making rent. More importantly, she had found a place in the community, and a growing certainty that Marysville could indeed become the home she had hoped for. Cole, meanwhile, made regular trips to the foothills outside town, returning with reports of land he'd explored and possibilities he'd discovered. He never explicitly stated that he was considering staying, but his actions spoke of a man putting down roots. One evening, as they sat by the river watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson, Cole finally voiced what had been on his mind. "I've found a place," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "About 20 miles east, where the valley starts to rise toward the Sierra. There's a creek that runs year-round, good pasture, some timber. The owner's looking to sell, heading back east, his wife's homesick." Harriet's heart quickened. "You're thinking of buying it?" "I am." Cole turned to face her, his expression serious. "I've driven cattle for others long enough. Time I had a place of my own." "It sounds perfect," Harriet said softly, understanding the significance of his decision. Cole nodded, his gaze returning to the river. "Almost perfect." They sat in companionable silence as the light faded, each contemplating futures that suddenly seemed full of possibility. The following Sunday, Harriet played for the church service, her fingers confident on the keys as she led the congregation through hymns of praise and thanksgiving. From her position at the piano, she could see Cole in the back row, his tall figure standing out among the townsfolk. He caught her eye and smiled, a private communication in a public setting. After the service, they walked together through the churchyard, accepting congratulations on her playing and invitations to various gatherings. To anyone watching, they appeared as an established couple, though neither had put such a definition on their relationship. "I was thinking," Cole said as they turned toward her rooms, "that place I told you about, I'd like you to see it. If you're willing, we could ride out there tomorrow. I've arranged to borrow a gentle mare from Porter." Harriet hesitated, unexpected nerves fluttering in her stomach. "I haven't ridden since I was a girl. The mare's docile as a kitten, and I'll be right beside you," Cole assured her. "It's a beautiful ride, especially this time of year with the wildflowers in bloom." The thought of seeing the place that had captured Cole's imagination was too tempting to refuse. "Yes, I'd like that very much." The next morning dawned clear and bright, promising perfect weather for their expedition. Harriet wore her sturdiest dress and boots, her hair braided and pinned securely for riding. Cole met her with 2 horses, his own rangy bay gelding and a placid-looking chestnut mare. "This is Daisy," he introduced, helping Harriet mount. "Gentlest horse in Marysville, according to Porter." The mare stood quietly as Harriet settled herself in the saddle, memories of childhood lessons returning slowly. Cole adjusted her stirrups, his hands efficient but respectful. "Comfortable?" he asked, looking up at her. Harriet nodded, gathering the reins as she'd been taught long ago. "I think so. It's been many years, but they say one never forgets. Just like playing piano," Cole said with a smile, swinging effortlessly onto his own mount. "Ready." They set off at a walk, Cole leading the way through town, and then onto the eastward road that would take them into the foothills. Harriet gradually relaxed as she remembered the rhythm of riding, her body adjusting to the mare's gentle gait. As they left Marysville behind, the landscape opened up before them, rolling hills covered in golden grass, dotted with oak trees and splashed with the colors of wildflowers. The Sierra Nevada rose in the distance, their peaks still bearing traces of snow despite the June warmth. "It's beautiful," Harriet breathed, taking in the expansive view. "This is what I meant about finding beauty in unexpected places," Cole said, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. "Most people just see dry hills and dusty roads. They miss all this." They rode at a leisurely pace, Cole pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the wildlife he'd encountered in his explorations. Harriet listened, enchanted by both the landscape and the man beside her, seeing it all through his experienced eyes. After about 2 hours, they crested a rise, and Cole reined his horse to a stop. "There it is," he said, gesturing to the valley below. Harriet gasped softly. The property lay in a natural bowl, protected by low hills on 3 sides. A creek, visible as a line of greener vegetation, wound through the center. A small cabin stood near a cluster of oak trees, its weathered wood blending harmoniously with the surroundings. Beyond it stretched open pastureland, lush by California standards, with scattered stands of trees providing shade. "Oh, Cole," she whispered, "it's perfect." His face lit with pleasure at her response. "Let's go down, I want to show you the cabin." They descended the slope carefully, the horses picking their way along a trail that showed signs of recent use. As they approached the cabin, Harriet could see that it was simple but solidly built, with a stone chimney and a small covered porch. Cole dismounted first, then helped Harriet down, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The brief contact sent a current of awareness through both of them, lingering even as he stepped back. "The current owner, Mr. Jenkins, said I could look around whenever I wanted," Cole explained, tying the horses to a hitching post near a water trough. "Come see." The cabin's interior was basic, one main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and chairs, and a bedstead in the corner. A lean-to addition at the back served as a kitchen, with a cast-iron stove and shelves for provisions. Everything was clean but spare, clearly the dwelling of someone preparing to depart. "It needs work," Cole acknowledged, watching Harriet's face as she took in the simple surroundings. "Proper windows, better furniture. The roof should be redone before winter." "But it has good bones," Harriet said, running her hand along the solid plank table. And that fireplace would keep it warm even in the coldest months. Cole nodded, pleased by her practical assessment. There's a spring house down by the creek keeps milk and butter cool even in summer, and room to expand if needed. If needed. The words hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken meaning. They stepped back outside, and Cole led her to the creek, where the water ran clear over smooth stones. Wildflowers grew along the banks, and birds darted among the branches of willows that dipped toward the surface. In the evenings, deer come down to drink here, Cole told her, his voice soft as though reluctant to disturb the tranquility of the place. And sometimes, if you're very still, you might see a fox or bobcat. Harriet tried to imagine such a scene, the peaceful gathering of wild creatures at dusk, the changing light on the hills, the quiet that would surround the cabin as day faded into night. It was so different from the life she had known, yet somehow, standing here with Cole, it felt right. They explored further, Cole showing her the boundaries of the property, the best grazing areas, the places where he thought fruit trees might thrive. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Harriet found herself making suggestions, imagining improvements, picturing the place as it could be rather than as it was. At midday, they returned to the cabin, where Cole unpacked a simple lunch. He had brought bread, cheese, apples, and a bottle of cider. They sat on the porch steps to eat, gazing out at the view that spread before them. "What do you think?" Cole finally asked, the question encompassing far more than just his opinion of the property. Harriet considered her answer carefully. "I think it's a wonderful place." "I can see why you're drawn to it." Cole nodded, his eyes on the distant hills. "I've been moving for so long, I never thought I'd find somewhere I wanted to stay." He paused, gathering courage. "But things change, people change." "Yes," Harriet agreed softly. "They do." Their eyes met, and in that moment, much was communicated without words: hope, possibility, the recognition of feelings that had grown steadily between them. "Harriet," Cole began, then hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. Before he could continue, a sound in the distance drew their attention: hoofbeats approaching along the trail. A moment later, a rider appeared, an older man on a dappled gray horse. "Afternoon, Alderman," he called as he drew closer. "Thought I might find you here." "Jenkins," Cole acknowledged, standing to greet the property owner. "Good to see you. This is Miss Dawson from Marysville." Harriet rose as well, nodding politely to the newcomer. "Madam," Jenkins tipped his hat. "Hope you don't mind my interruption. Just wanted to let Alderman know I've had another inquiry about the place. Fellow from up Sacramento way looking to expand his holdings." Cole's expression sharpened with interest. "Is that so? Offered a fair price too. But I told him you had first consideration, given our discussions." Jenkins dismounted, tying his horse beside theirs. "Thought you should know, case you wanted to make a decision sooner rather than later." "I appreciate that," Cole said. "How soon were you hoping to conclude matters?" "End of the month would suit me. Gives me time to get my affairs in order before heading back to Ohio." Jenkins glanced between Cole and Harriet, a knowing look crossing his weathered features. "But I don't mean to rush you, especially if you've got other considerations to weigh." The emphasis on the last words made Harriet blush slightly, aware of the assumptions the older man was making about their relationship. "I understand," Cole replied. "I'll let you know my decision within the week." After Jenkins departed, a new tension filled the air between them. The interruption had broken the moment of connection, leaving unspoken words hanging between them. "We should head back before it gets too late," Cole finally said, his voice carefully neutral. "The ride takes longer in the afternoon heat." Harriet nodded, disappointment mingling with the lingering pleasure of the day. As Cole helped her mount Daisy, their hands touched briefly, and she found herself wishing for the courage to say what was in her heart. The ride back to Marysville was quieter, both of them lost in thought. The landscape seemed even more beautiful in the golden afternoon light, the hills burnished with the promise of summer abundance. Harriet tried to commit it all to memory: the sweep of the land, the scent of sage and dust, the solid presence of the man riding beside her. When they reached town, Cole escorted her to her door, the familiar routine now charged with new meaning after the day they had shared. "Thank you for showing me the property," Harriet said as they paused at the foot of her stairs. "It's truly lovely." "I'm glad you thought so," Cole replied, his eyes searching hers. "Harriet, about what Jenkins said, you don't need to explain," she interrupted gently. "It's a business decision and you should consider it carefully." "It's not just a business decision," Cole said, his voice low and fervent. "You must know that by now." Harriet's heart quickened at the intensity in his gaze. "What is it then? A future? A home?" He took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "Something I never thought I wanted until I met you." The words hung between them, honest and unadorned. Harriet felt tears prick at her eyes, unexpected emotion welling up at this glimpse of a possibility she had scarcely allowed herself to imagine. "Cole, don't answer now," he said quickly. "I've sprung this on you without proper consideration." "I should have," he stopped, frustrated by his own lack of eloquence. "What I mean to say is, I care for you, Harriet, deeply. And any decision I make about that place, about my future, I want you to be part of it, if you're willing." The simplicity of his declaration touched her more than flowery words ever could. "I care for you too," she replied, her voice steady despite the tumult of emotions within. "And I would very much like to be part of that conversation." Relief and joy transformed his features. On impulse, he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Tomorrow, then. We can talk properly." "Tomorrow," she agreed, her smile reflecting his own. As Cole walked away, Harriet climbed the stairs to her room, her mind and heart full of the day's revelations. Inside, she went directly to the piano, her fingers finding a melody that expressed what words could not: hope, tenderness, the unexpected gift of finding connection in a place where she had known only struggle. The notes filled her small room, drifting out into the early evening air, a private celebration of possibilities newly discovered. Cole returned to his rented room at the boarding house, his thoughts racing with plans and considerations. The property represented everything he had worked toward over years of hard traveling: a place of his own, independence, the chance to build something lasting. But now, those long-held dreams had expanded to include Harriet, her music, the life they might create together. He sat at the simple desk in his room, pulling paper and pencil from his saddlebag. There were calculations to be made, resources to be assessed. If he purchased Jenkins' place, he would need to invest in cattle, equipment, supplies for improvements to the cabin. It would take nearly everything he had saved, but as he worked through the figures, Cole found himself smiling. For the first time in his adult life, he was planning not just for himself, but for a shared future. The thought brought a contentment he hadn't known he was missing. The next morning, Harriet woke early, anticipation making sleep impossible. She dressed with care in her green dress, Cole's favorite. She had noticed and arranged her hair simply but attractively. Today might well be the day that would change the course of her life, and she wanted to be prepared, both practically and emotionally. She was just finishing her morning cup of tea when a knock sounded at her door earlier than Cole usually called. Opening it, she found not Cole but Mrs. Wilkins, her normally cheerful face drawn with concern. "My dear," the older woman said, stepping inside without invitation, I've just heard the most distressing news." "What is it?" Harriet asked, alarm rising at her friend's obvious distress. "There was trouble at the saloon last night." "Mr. Alderman." Mrs. Wilkins hesitated, clearly reluctant to continue. "Cole, what about him? Is he hurt?" Panic edged Harriet's voice. "No, nothing like that, but there was an altercation. Words exchanged with a stranger, then fists. The sheriff had to intervene." Relief that Cole wasn't injured quickly gave way to confusion. "That doesn't sound like Cole at all. He's the most even-tempered man I know." Mrs. Wilkins sighed, settling herself in the room's single chair. "The stranger was saying unkind things about you, my dear. Your situation, your relationship with Mr. Alderman, vicious gossip, nothing more, but Mr. Alderman took exception, quite forcefully from what I hear." Harriet sank onto the piano bench, her legs suddenly weak. "Oh no. The sheriff released him this morning with just a warning, but—" Mrs. Wilkins hesitated again. "There's talk, Harriet, not among your friends, of course, but others. You know how people can be." Harriet did know. A single woman, a man calling regularly, now a public altercation in her name. It was the sort of thing that could damage her newly established position in the community, threaten the teaching opportunities that were just beginning to provide stability. "I thought you should hear it from a friend," Mrs. Wilkins concluded, her kind eyes full of sympathy, "and perhaps consider how to proceed with discretion." After Mrs. Wilkins left, Harriet paced her small room, distress and uncertainty warring within her. She didn't doubt Cole's intentions. His words yesterday had made those clear enough. But the timing of this incident couldn't have been worse, coming just as they were on the verge of discussing a future together. Would Cole reconsider, faced with the reality that his association with her had led to public conflict? Would her own reputation, so carefully maintained despite her financial struggles, now be tarnished by whispers and speculation? The morning that had dawned so full of promise now seemed clouded with doubt. When Cole's knock finally came, Harriet opened the door with trepidation, uncertain what to expect. He stood before her, his face showing signs of the previous night's altercation, a bruise darkening one cheekbone, a small cut at the corner of his mouth. "Cole, your face, it's nothing," he said dismissively, stepping into the room when she moved aside. "Harriet, I need to explain, Mrs. Wilkins told me what happened," she interrupted, gesturing for him to sit. "Cole, you shouldn't have. I couldn't let him speak of you that way," Cole said firmly, remaining standing. "The things he was saying, no man with any honor would have let it pass." Harriet sighed, torn between appreciation for his defense and concern for the consequences. "I understand, but now there's talk. People speculating about us, about my reputation. Then let's give them something definite to talk about," Cole said, his voice suddenly decisive. He moved closer, taking her hands in his. "Marry me, Harriet." The directness of the proposal took her breath away. "What? Marry me?" he repeated, his eyes never leaving hers. "I love you. I think I have since the first time I heard you play. These past weeks have only confirmed what my heart knew immediately, that you're the woman I want to spend my life with." Tears filled Harriet's eyes at the simple, heartfelt declaration. "Cole, I know it's sudden," he continued earnestly. "I had planned to court you properly, to wait until the property was secured, until I could offer you a home worthy of you. But last night made me realize that life doesn't always allow for perfect timing. Sometimes you have to seize happiness when it presents itself." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out a small object that glinted in the morning light, a ring, simple but beautifully crafted, a small pearl set in gold. "I bought this in San Francisco last year," he explained, looking slightly embarrassed. "Not for anyone specific, just because it reminded me of something my mother once had." I've carried it ever since, thinking someday I might find a reason to give it to someone. Now I know that someone is you." Harriet stared at the ring, then at the man holding it, his face earnest and vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. In that moment, all her doubts and concerns seemed to fall away, leaving only the certainty that had been growing in her heart for weeks. "Yes," she said softly, then more firmly. "Yes, Cole, I will marry you." Joy transformed his face as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though meant for her all along. Then he was drawing her into his arms, his kiss gentle despite the urgency of his emotions, mindful of his injured lip and of her inexperience. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "I promise you won't regret this, Harriet. I'll work every day to make you happy." "I know you will," she replied, her hands resting on his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. "And I'll do the same for you." They stood together for a long moment, absorbing the magnitude of the step they had just taken. Then practical considerations began to assert themselves. "We should speak to Reverend Thomas," Harriet said, "and I'll need to inform Mrs. Wilkins and my students' families." Cole nodded, his mind moving along similar paths. "I'll need to conclude the purchase with Jenkins as soon as possible and begin improvements to the cabin. It's no place for a bride as it stands." "When should we marry?" Harriet asked, the reality of their engagement beginning to sink in. "How soon can it be arranged?" Cole countered, his smile both teasing and tender. "Tomorrow wouldn't be too soon for me." Harriet laughed, the sound full of joy and newfound confidence. "Perhaps a bit more time would be wise. 2 weeks. That should allow for proper announcements and preparations without undue delay." 2 weeks, Cole agreed, lifting her hand to press a kiss to the pearl that now adorned it. "And then a lifetime." The news of their engagement spread quickly through Marysville, producing a variety of reactions. Mrs. Wilkins and other friends who had watched their relationship develop expressed genuine delight. Some who had participated in the gossip were silenced by the legitimacy of formal betrothal. Others, including a few of Harriet's students' mothers, raised eyebrows at the speed of the arrangement but were mollified by Reverend Thomas's public blessing of the match. The following days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Cole rode out to Jenkins' property and finalized the purchase, paying a fair price that left him with enough to begin the most necessary improvements. Harriet continued her teaching and church playing, now with a new sense of purpose and permanence. Together, they rode out to the property whenever Harriet's schedule allowed, making plans for the cabin's transformation. Cole hired 2 men from town to help with the more substantial work, replacing the roof, adding proper windows, constructing a separate bedroom. Harriet focused on the interior, making curtains from fabric purchased at Mrs. Wilkins' recommendation, planning the arrangement of furniture they would need. The question of the piano was resolved one evening as they sat on the cabin's porch, watching the sunset paint the hills in gold and crimson. "We'll need to hire a wagon to move it," Cole said, his arm around Harriet's shoulders. "The trail's rough in places, but if we're careful." "Are you sure there's room?" Harriet asked, thinking of the cabin's modest dimensions. "We'll make room," Cole replied simply. "Your music is part of who you are, Harriet. It belongs in our home as surely as you do." The evening before their wedding, Harriet sat at her piano for the last time in the room above the millinery shop. Her few possessions were packed, ready to be transported to the cabin that would become their home. Tomorrow, after the ceremony, they would spend their first night at the small hotel in town, and the following day begin their life together on the property that Cole now referred to as our place. Her fingers moved over the keys, playing not a formal piece, but an improvisation that expressed her emotions, gratitude for the unexpected turn her life had taken, joy in the love she had found, excitement for the future that awaited. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. Opening it, she found Cole, his expression both serious and tender. "I know it's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding," he said, "but there's something I wanted to give you tonight." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside, Harriet found a leather-bound book, its pages blank and waiting. "For your music," Cole explained. "New compositions for our new life. I thought perhaps—" He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "I thought perhaps you might write something for tomorrow for us." Touched beyond words, Harriet rose on tiptoe to kiss him softly. "It's perfect. Thank you." After he left, she returned to the piano, the empty book open beside her. Slowly, a melody began to take shape beneath her fingers, a wedding song, a love song, a promise set to music. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, as though nature itself approved of their union. The small church was filled with well-wishers, Harriet's students and their families, Cole's business acquaintances, neighbors who had come to know and respect them both. Harriet wore a dress of ivory silk, ordered specially from Sacramento with the first proceeds from her increased teaching load. Simple yet elegant, it transformed her from the struggling music teacher into a radiant bride. In her hands, she carried a bouquet of wildflowers gathered from the hills around their new home. Cole waited at the altar in a new suit, his weathered face solemn with the importance of the moment. But when Harriet appeared at the church door, his expression transformed into one of such open joy and wonder that tears sprang to her eyes. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows spoken with quiet certainty. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Cole kissed her with reverent tenderness, sealing their commitment before God and community. Afterward, a celebration was held in the church hall, with food contributed by neighbors and music provided by some of Harriet's more advanced students. When it came time for the bride to play, Harriet took her place at the church piano and performed the piece she had composed the night before, a melody that spoke of journeys ending and beginning, of love found in unexpected places, of hope blossoming in new soil. Cole stood nearby, watching his wife with pride and wonder, still scarcely able to believe that this extraordinary woman had chosen to share her life with him. As evening approached, they thanked their guests and departed for the hotel, where a special suite had been prepared for them. Tomorrow would begin the practical aspects of their new life together: the move to the cabin, the continued improvements, the blending of two independent lives into one shared existence. But tonight belonged to them alone, a sacred space to discover each other as husband and wife. In the privacy of their room, all the uncertainties that might have accompanied such intimacy between two people who had known primarily reserve in their relationship fell away, replaced by tenderness and trust. Cole's strength was tempered by gentleness, Harriet's inexperience balanced by willingness to learn. Together, they found a harmony as perfect as any music Harriet had ever played, a connection that transcended physical joining to touch something deeper within them both. Later, as moonlight filtered through the curtains, Harriet lay with her head on Cole's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "Happy?" he asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "Completely," she replied, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. "And you?" "More than I ever thought possible," he said, drawing her closer. "Thank you for taking a chance on a wandering cowboy who couldn't resist your music." Harriet smiled, remembering how it had all begun. "Thank you for saving my piano when I thought all was lost." "Best investment I ever made," Cole murmured, his lips finding hers once more. The move to their cabin the following day went smoothly, thanks to careful planning and the help of friends. The piano was the most challenging item to transport, requiring a specially padded wagon and 4 strong men to manage the steep parts of the trail. But by sunset, it was installed in its place of honor in the main room of their cabin, positioned where the light from the new windows would fall upon the keys during the day. That evening, as twilight gathered, Cole built a fire in the stone hearth while Harriet prepared their first meal in their new home. The cabin, though still simple, had been transformed by their combined efforts. Curtains at the windows, comfortable furniture arranged with care, shelves filled with their books and small treasures. After supper, they sat together on the porch, watching as stars appeared in the darkening sky. In the distance, a coyote called, answered by another farther off. The creek murmured its constant song, a natural accompaniment to the night sounds of their land. "It's so peaceful," Harriet said, leaning against Cole's shoulder. "Different from town, but beautiful in its own way." Cole nodded, his arm tightening around her. "This is what I always sought, I think, in all those years of moving from place to place. Not just land or a home, but this feeling of belonging, of rightness." Harriet understood perfectly. From the moment she had first seen this valley, she had felt a connection to it, as though some part of her had been waiting to find this particular spot on earth. Later, as full darkness settled over their home, Harriet sat at her piano, playing softly while Cole finished banking the fire for the night. The familiar act performed in this new setting felt both strange and right, a bridge between her past and the future they would build together. As the final notes faded, Cole came to stand beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "Play something else," he asked. "Anything you like." Harriet smiled up at her husband, her fingers returning to the keys to find the melody she had played that first night he had heard her Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the piece that had drawn him to her window, that had set in motion everything that followed. As she played, Cole stood with his eyes closed, absorbing the music and the moment. When she finished, he bent to kiss the top of her head. "I love you, Harriet Alderman," he said softly. "And I love you," she replied, rising to meet his embrace. "Welcome home, Cole." Together, they extinguished the lamps and made their way to their bedroom, leaving the piano standing silent but fulfilled in the moonlight that streamed through the new windows, a symbol of the past preserved, the present cherished, and the future full of promise. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys to the Alderman Ranch, as Cole and Harriet built their life together. The small herd of cattle Cole initially purchased grew steadily, and he added horses as well, developing a reputation for breeding sturdy, intelligent mounts suited to the demands of the region. Harriet continued to play at the church in Marysville on Sundays, making the ride into town with Cole, who used the opportunity to handle business matters. Her teaching expanded to include students who rode out to the ranch for lessons on certain days, their parents recognizing that Harriet's talents warranted the extra effort of the journey. The cabin grew as their needs did, first with a proper kitchen and expanded porch, then with additional bedrooms as their family increased. Sarah came first, born on a spring morning 2 years after their marriage, with her father's eyes and her mother's musical talent evident from an early age. Thomas followed 18 months later, a sturdy boy who showed Cole's affinity for horses almost as soon as he could walk. And finally, little Emma, their unexpected blessing, who arrived when Sarah was 7, completing their family with her sunny disposition and curious mind. Through it all, the piano remained the heart of their home, a gathering place where Harriet taught their children, where family and friends joined in song during frequent gatherings, where melodies marked the passing seasons and celebrated milestones. On the evening of their 10th wedding anniversary, Cole surprised Harriet with a special gift, the deed to the ranch, now fully paid for and officially registered in both their names. They celebrated privately, after the children were asleep, dancing slowly in the main room to music that existed only in their memories and hearts. "Did you ever imagine this?" Harriet asked as they swayed together in the firelight. "That night when you heard me playing and learned the piano was to be sold?" Cole's arms tightened around her waist. "Not in my wildest dreams," he admitted. "I only knew I couldn't bear the thought of that music ending." "I'm glad you couldn't," Harriet said softly, resting her head against his chest. "Because of you, it never did." Outside their window, the California night spread star-filled and vast above the land they had nurtured together, a testament to how love, like music, could transform the simplest moments into something extraordinary, creating harmony from separate notes, building a composition neither could have written alone.